This week we finished another session of The Veil, the third session in that Powered by the Apocalypse cyberpunk game by Semjoko Publishing. A cyberpunk game which, unlike others, is specifically engineered to help you explore the inner workings, the thoughts, the feelings, the emotions of the characters in a cyberpunk story, and to explore, let's say, the nature of reality itself, much like the fictional genre attempts to do. And certainly helps me, as a long-term reader of writers like Gibson, get that particular feel. So, our group, for those just tuning in, has decided to attempt the game with 3 players, and we will each rotate MC, or game mastering, duties as we explore the game. None of us have really done much live play of Powered by the Apocalypse. We each have our own explorations of it. But this is really an endeavor to learn the game together in a very real sense, to come away from this experience with a much expanded appreciation and understanding of the game than we would have been able to do in this period of time by ourselves. That's part of the reason why we're sharing the MC duties. The first MC is now finished, having done his 3 sessions. The second MC is ready to go. I'll be doing the last 3 sessions, session 7, 8, and 9. And there are specific reasons for that tied to our characters. Our characters I haven't talked about very much, and we haven't seen the first MC's character very much. We've seen him only peripherally, and that is a street preacher named Yorn. Yorn has very specific ideas about how humanity should view itself and relate to each other, and how the veil, the layer of, let's say, virtual reality over everything, the augmented reality of daily life, relates to that. Second character, one we've seen a lot of, having had a solo session and being the primary mover and shaker of the first session, is Tess. Tess is built from the Apparatus playbook and is an artificial construct, appears human but isn't, and has entered play with a lot of questions about her own nature and what it is that she should be doing. And Ivan, who plays Tess, made some pretty interesting decisions about how the character's psyche would be set up, and therefore created a very interesting dynamic between himself and the MC, one which made the MC fairly uncomfortable, as it required him to suggest things for the character, things the character thinks, or things the character suddenly wants to do, and that's really not his style. So for all of us, there are little moments of, let's say, discomfort in exploring this type of game. My character, Cadmus, is from a playbook called The Dying. This character is on a timeline with an incurable disease, and sometime during play will expire. And it's what you do before that happens which makes all the difference, of course. This playbook explores, that kind of desperation, that kind of existential philosophy, and has the perk of having some pretty out there abilities to go along with the disease that fit that cyberpunk attitude and nature. So these 3 characters are somehow together going to craft a story powered by the apocalypse as envisioned through the Veil. Now, these recaps and reflections videos I've been making about the Veil have been more reflection than recap, so let's address that. The campaign for the first 3 sessions, plus the solo session, kind of a prelude run for Tess earlier on, really has brought these 3 characters together in one part of a city called the Appalachian Heights. And the Appalachian Heights runs basically from Montreal to New York. This mega city, how it came to be formed is lost and irrelevant. But the way the city is structured is based on the idea of levels. The more affluent you are, the higher you live, the further away from the muck and mire of the city streets. Our characters, 2 of the 3 of them, are street level characters, and one, mine, lives above them but works among them. This is a decision, part of what you need to do when you're building a character for the Veil, a very cyberpunk decision. What are you willing to do to get what you want, kind of thing. In the first session, we explore the unrest in Appalachian Heights, in the Heights, right? We witness riots. We have to move through the riots, and we become affected by the riots and are thrown together and get that first inkling of that instant kind of trust when you recognize a stranger who's somehow on the same wavelength as you. And a lot of our interesting personality quirks came out. So as far as design goes, we were instantly aware of how playbooks push you together, cause specific interactions, and bring things into play. It's pretty effective for getting things going. On the downside, what we find is that while a game built on these premises is encoding, as I've said before, the best practices of the past, when you already have those practices as a part of your normal palette of skills, it's awkward, and it feels awkward to approach things that are normally instinct or habit or style as a mechanical process, as a procedure. It's interesting to see it as a procedure. The results are fun, but that moment of, wait a minute, what I would normally do is now going to be handled by this procedure that's written in the book. That's the word I want to say. I have said it's awkward. Getting through that awkwardness, we don't know how long that's going to take. We don't know if it will ever go away. We might have to play a whole lot more than just 9 sessions before we can instantly switch gears into doing things this way, into how we've done things for 30-odd years. Life is hard. Now, when you go and look at these actual plays, you're going to see that awkwardness, and that's what's going on. You're also going to see moments where a rule that we thought we had in mind isn't in mind. It didn't stick. Or we had different interpretations of what a rule really means based on past experience. The past experience is bleeding into the current experience. And like, wait a minute, does that really mean what we think it means? And has it been changed for this specific version of Powered by the Apocalypse or not? It's all been very interesting and engaging, and it's the kind of thing that the three of us like to do. It doesn't mean that the game is without frustration. It's not all sunshine and roses. There are moments of friction, and in those first 3 sessions, I would say the greatest, or the single greatest source of friction has been about beliefs. Now, the first MC has a lot of experience with Burning Wheel and really wants to address things the way that he has learned to do through lots and lots and lots of play of Burning Wheel, whereas the other 2 of us don't have nearly so much exposure to Burning Wheel, maybe none at all, and are approaching beliefs from a very different point of view. Reading the same text, drawing from the same source in the Veil, but approach them very differently, and we've had to hammer out what that means, what that actually says, and how we're going to bring it about. For the sake of harmony within the group, I think 2 of us, Ivan and I, have adapted to the way that Jean-Francois has wanted things to go for the first 3 sessions. We've adapted to encode our beliefs to serve a much stronger function than we want, but that seems to be in harmony with what the game is probably asking for. Also, it's certainly much more in harmony with having visible progression, like character improvement, in the time frame of the 9 sessions which we have allotted for this experiment. So it all makes sense. There's a little bit of resistance because maybe we have been down that road before in other games, and that's not a direction that we explicitly enjoy. But then again, it's just 9 sessions, and we want to see what the game can do, so we should. It's one of those things. It's recognizing your bias and deciding if you want to go with that bias or fight it at risk of diminishing your enjoyment. That makes sense. So what am I talking about? Beliefs are a source of experience points. Having them come into play provides you with experience. Having them get you into trouble when they come into play provides you with experience. And working through them and recognizing that in some way that belief really has been tested so much that it needs to be altered fundamentally. And now you're going to be bringing that into play. From one point of view, beliefs could represent a frame for who the character is and how you are going to play them, and it's a signal to everybody in the game how the character is going to be played. This is who the character is. It's belief! The vocabulary, I think, that should have been chosen for beliefs to produce the desired effect is goals. What are you going for? Short term, in a relationship around the group, and long term, what are you trying to demonstrate or prove or achieve or whatever? These are goals. They're not beliefs. These are not things that you believe to be true. These are things that you're trying to make happen. So the vocabulary, in a sense, gets in the way. But either way, expressing these three pivotal elements of your character makes it really easy to get your character out on the table and exposed so that you can experience it and decide what's appropriate to happen next. What decisions are you going to make next? So I like the idea of it. I'm not sure I like the specific implementation of it. And like I said, I prefer to have something called a belief mean something else. And that's just a preference. That's me and my bias fighting against what is actually encoded in the rules, which, if you want to play the game raw, is a complete waste of time and something I have stopped doing. But this was my experience in the moment in play. Not preparing for play, not after play, but in play, if you see what I mean. So that has been the single greatest source of friction in this first part. And now what I'm going to predict is going to be a source of friction, and it's going to be much less, is really about what you get to contribute. As I have felt watching the sessions over again, that when my character is asking questions and my character is organized to generate a lot of questions and pull a lot of information out of NPCs and the environment. So the MC has to do an awful lot of, answering on the spot. I feel that I have been overstepping my boundaries. I've been asking questions I shouldn't be asking, or I've been asking them in a way I shouldn't be asking them. I could be wrong on that. Maybe I'm doing exactly what I'm supposed to be doing, but I get the feeling that I'm pushing an agenda when I should be opening one. And I should be following the questions as written much more closely than I have been. I've been playing jazz with the questions in a way, I think, which is not intended. That's my response. That's my reflection on what I have put in there. And I think when it's Jean-Francois and I, with Ivan running the game, that's going to expand. That's going to happen more than it has been with Jean-Francois and I playing off of each other. We are going to, I think, more and more overstep our boundaries than has been going on with just me and Ivan. Let's see what happens with that. That's just my suspicion about what's going to happen next. And maybe by putting this out there now, I've forestalled, or I will have sparked a conversation between us about that, and so it doesn't happen. But this is what I feel is coming next, and this is what I'm trying to prepare for. I want to be more in tune with what the questions which come as a result of moves mean. Now, also in this session, we got to have our first combat. So let's get back to the recap part. As I said, we began with Tess and the three characters being around the centralized location. So my character's workplace, the street preacher's preaching point, and where Tess ultimately gets an apartment are all in the same kind of intersection. And because of these events, because of these riots from session 1, we're all thrown together. We're all aware of each other. The street preacher and my character Cadmus, very tangentially, we're aware of each other, and that's the extent of it. And Tess and I are put together and go on a little bit of an adventure looking for just dinner to get away from the riots, and one thing leads to another, and we wind up in a black market and uncover some interesting information, which snowballs into the second session. And in the second session, we expand our pool of contacts. We learn more about each other. We kind of rub each other the right way and the wrong way, which is kind of funny to say when you think about what Tessa's profession is, but that's not what I mean. And then we wind up having witnessed brutal violence against a harmless fellow, and we object to it. The third session opens up with us doing something about it, or at least trying to do something about it. It's in this third session that I stopped messing around with the character. I had some ideas from my initial framing of the beliefs of what I wanted to do with Cadmus, but as a result of how the character was bumping up against the other characters, I was discovering in play who he was, and I was sticking to my guns on some things that I wasn't sure about. And so I had a formed and a half-formed idea of the character, which over the 3 sessions has merged together in sort of a Tao of the character, in a sense. And I had the opportunity, through just random chance and dumb bad luck, to explode onto the scene with the other side of the character, which I wasn't sure would ever come out, but was informing how I behaved. And if you listen to Ivan's recap and reflections on this, and if you listen to our post-session chat, which is right at the end of the actual play, you'll see some of what I'm talking about. The polarity, the light side and dark side of the character. And I only have this short amount of time, so I wasn't really sure what I wanted to have the character cling to, and so I decided to take a leap of faith, to leap out into the fiction and see what presented itself as a handhold. So I didn't have an agenda of showing what the character was other than those 3 beliefs, and I was willing to find out how those beliefs could be interpreted and reinterpreted in play. And that's really what I wanted from the beliefs. And stepping away from them to turn them into specific goals for the session, a specific relationship goal, and kind of a philosophy, weakened that somewhat. And at the same time, gave me a much accelerated experience. So it paid off in a certain amount of in-the-moment enjoyment, with a touch of disappointment of what could have been if I had created this character for a different game that operated in a different environment. So what's going to happen next? Well, we have had my character commit a horrible and random and brutal act of violence leading to murder, which was witnessed. This is going to go somewhere. We ended on a cliffhanger with my character with, a laser sight targeting his chest. We were willingly walking toward meeting an operative we knew we couldn't trust, but this was a nice little twist on it, which made things worse. And Ivan gets handed this as the opening of his first session. So that should be fun to see how he deals with it and how he works Yorn the Street Preacher in and where and when. The timeline of my character could come suddenly to an end. But this session enabled us to have our first real combat. We used the duel mechanic. And what dueling allows is a semi-granular resolution of a conflict, meaning it's not one roll determines how the entire combat goes. One roll determines how what's called a bout goes, and you generate a certain amount of hold, and you spend hold to achieve effects, such as inflicting actual harm or changing the scene. Changing the scene might be something like, in a classic example from film, is the characters are fighting in a hotel room high up, and you could spend hold to go out the window and fall into the pool. If your intention is just to change scene, maybe to enable getting away later or something like that, then that's what you get. But if your intention is to use the environment as to your advantage, such as you're in a position to swim and they are not, then you get +1 hold for the next bout. So this is all pretty interesting. It's granular enough to be interesting, but it's focus is, of course, getting you into a back and forth description of how the combat is going to go. You each get to narrate what your hold means. Jean-Francois, the MC, had this piece of dirt, filth, NPC sucker punch, Cadmus. I was pretty surprised by that as a player, and recognizing this was an opportunity to, show the frustration that I've been, I hope, subtly role-playing through the arc. So I'm willing to unwind on this guy. And also as a player, I'm kind of interested in seeing how a duel plays out. I didn't really want it to happen here, and it was kind of a safe environment. I was looking for something a little bit more that would involve like chases and escapes kind of thing. That was kind of the hope I was dragging around with me. But what I ended up with was a really surprisingly strong reaction as I realized how much freedom I had in this particular scene. And I'm used to narrating off of successes, exactly how my character handles himself. And I'm used to coloring within the lines of how I can interpret the amount of damage that I've inflicted and that sort of thing. Here it was much more open. And I could, if I wanted, go as far as murder. Or I could dial it back and go less. What do I want to do? And my mind is racing in that particular scene. And I had a lot of cool opportunities. For example, activating his special gift as one of the dying. I think this would have been pretty spectacular from a viewing point of view of going out of phase, taking this scumbag with me, pushing him through the ice and snow into the stairs and leaving him there. No evidence what happened to that guy. There's just this big electrical discharge and now he's gone. Still dead, but how he wound up dead could have been pretty dramatic. But is that who Cadmus is? And one of the reasons why I stepped away from it is that the symptoms which will inevitably result from doing that is that his appearance changes. So it would almost be like a free murder. I didn't want that. And I also felt that that put Cadmus too intellectually in charge when that wasn't what was happening. He was furious. And so I narrated a brutal beatdown, which it felt right. So I was really satisfied with how the character appeared in that moment, and I was hoping that the consequences which spin out from that aren't frustrating for my fellow players, but at the same time, that's where I really needed to go in that moment with the character. And I enjoy that kind of experience. I don't like spotlight stealing, and I don't like showboating, and I don't like making trouble that is sourced in an out-of-character motivation. So hopefully, when people watch that, they can see where it came from. I don't know if I can explain where it came from, but maybe if the character continues beyond the next session, we'll see some more of it and it will make more sense. But I personally am enjoying being in that conflicted position. And having been able to talk about it in character with Ivan, in the character of Tess, in a pretty ridiculous environment, was also an important role-playing moment. I got more role-playing satisfaction from session 3 than any of the 2 previous sessions, which is interesting because the second session is very, very heavy on role-playing, very, very light on interactions with the system. So that pretty much ends my reflections on session 3 of The Veil. I very much enjoyed the chance to do it. I was very pleased that Jean-Francois stepped up to run the first sessions, which is never easy, and it means you're taking on the bulk of the frustration and the problems, the steepest part of the learning curve and all of that, and me going at the end is a very unusual thing for me. I usually go first. So knowing that I'll be going into the last 3 sessions with a greater amount of familiarity than the other guys have had to deal with is bizarre, but hopefully I'll be able to live up to that. So thanks for watching. If you've come this far, the 4th session of The Veil should happen in a couple of weeks.